this is the Rollins and Mandy Philadelphia tour. June 11, 2022. We're going to start our Philadelphia tour at Ridden House. This is where I live. This is Rittenhouse Square, one of the 5 squares in Philadelphia. When Philadelphia was founded in 1682, founded by William Penn, a Quaker, and his idea was like he didn't like European cities. They were dirty and there was disease and there was crime. So he was a Quaker and he thought, I'm going to make a city where in between these 2 rivers, there's going to be these big streets. Everyone's going to spread out and live in big plots of land, and it's going to be really clean and it'll be really nice. And everyone's going to be religious and happy and everything. So the city had 5 parks, and you can think of like an X. And there's 4 parks on the ends of the X's, and then in the middle of the X there's another park. So this is the southwestern part of the X, is this part. For the first like 100 years or more, no one lived over here. Everyone wanted to live on the east side of town by the Delaware River, and it got really crowded and it was completely against like his whole dream. But eventually, you know, rich people don't want to live by the poor people. So at some point in the 1800s, rich people started moving over here, and they're like, oh, it's nice over here. There's no one around. We can have big houses. All the poor people are far away. And then now this is kind of one of the nicest parts of the city. But although this was part of the original plan, this was basically just like country for like no one lived here for a long time. This park was redesigned around the beginning of the 1900s in kind of like a French style. So what you see now is what it's looked like for the last 100 years, and it's like more French and fancy. There you go. Mandy asked, why did people go to Philadelphia? You know, at the time, this was one of the biggest cities in America. William Penn he was a Quaker. He really hated monarchy. Yeah. He thought Europe was corrupt, immoral, blah, blah, blah. And, but he actually, his dad was like high up in England. And his dad was like really good friends with the King of England. Yeah. But he was like, I'm a Quaker. I don't believe in monarchy. I think everyone should be equal, blah, blah, blah. He went to jail in England. But then his dad got him out of jail. And then after his dad died, the king was always nice to him because he loved his dad, who was an admiral in like the Navy or something. And so somehow, I don't actually know how this happened, but basically he got the King of England to agree, I'll give you a huge chunk of land in America, and you can just go over there and do your thing, and do your Quaker thing, and all the Quakers can go with you, because we don't like them. So he got this huge piece of land, and he wanted to call it Sylvania, because that's Latin for forest or something. Oh. And then the King of England was like, no, you have to name it after your dad, because I like your dad. So that's why it's Pennsylvania. Wow. And then this was the city that he founded here. And I mean, lots of people came. Quakers came. German people came. I guess Quakers were German, a lot of them. Yeah. But people were coming here. It's surrounded by 2 rivers. You know, I'm not really sure why it became a major city, but at the time it was one of the biggest cities in America. There was a lot of banking here. I don't know the answer to your question. All I know is, you know, Benjamin Franklin didn't like Boston. He liked Philadelphia. Boston was kind of more like European. It was dirty. The streets were all windy and stuff. Here, it's, you know, it was supposed to be a more ordered city. Yeah. It might not have turned out that way exactly, but that was kind of the idea. We're still in Rittenhouse Square. Yeah. A lot of these buildings, including where I live, were built in like the 1860s. So like I was saying before, like before the middle of the 1800s, no one was living out here. Yeah. But then all of a sudden it kind of became the cool, nice place to live. And this street was known for having lots of doctors at the time. Another interesting fact about Rittenhouse is that in the 1950s, this was kind of the place where gay men in Philadelphia would go. And the park was like, that's where you go to meet other gay men. So that was like kind of what they were known for. Some people called them the Spruce Street Boys, all the young gay men living in this part of the city. Yeah. Eventually in the 60s and 70s, the gay community kind of moved east to the neighborhood area, which we'll go by later. But before they were here. So this is City Hall right here. You can see it right there. City Hall was actually built where I said before there were 5 parks and there was one in the middle. Yeah. That's the middle. Got it. So that's where they put City Hall. Yeah. when they were still building it, it still wasn't sure yet. Like, most of everyone lived over there, so City Hall was still kind of away from the heart of the city.
Yeah.
But the city was moving this way anyway, so they decided to build it there. They started building it in 1870 or 1871. It took 30 years to build it. It was supposed to be the tallest building in the world, but then once it was finished, it took 30 years. There were two structures taller than it, so it already wasn't the tallest in the world. The two structures were the Washington Monument and the Eiffel Tower. They both got built like 10 years before this got finished. So, but it was still the tallest like building where people are actually inside and working or living. But then 6 years later, a building in New York or somewhere beat it. So for 6 years, it was something. But anyway, it's the City Hall. On the very top of City Hall, you'll see a statue. That's William Penn.
Oh.
From here, it doesn't look that big. It's actually like his head is as tall as me.
Yeah.
It's a huge statue.
Yeah.
And the other thing about City Hall is it's all stone. There's no steel or metal frame. So it's one of the biggest buildings in the world that's completely like brick and stone. And people started to say it looked ugly. They wanted to tear it down. And because it's all stone, it was really expensive to tear it down. So in like the 1970s, they looked at it and they thought about tearing it down. And they were like, it's going to cost too much. So they never did. And now people like it. But back in the 70s and stuff, everyone's like, it's ugly. I think it looks nice.
Was it restored though? Because like where William Penn is really white.
That's because they did a new paint job
Oh.
in like the 90s. And the top part where it's a different color, that's actually metal. It's not stone. The rest is stone, but that's metal. And when they repainted it, they wanted to use this like really special paint that'll last for like 100 years. And in that time, they only had 3 colors. So they couldn't get it to match. That's why it looks a different color. This is at the Magic Gardens. It's just kind of like an art installation that was built by this guy, Isaiah Zager. And what's kind of important to know in the context is like, this is South Street. So original Philadelphia, this was the southern border of the city. And then next to it is Moyamensing, like a different town. And for some reason, South Street it's always kind of like the seedy part of town. Maybe it's because it's on the border, but this is kind of where there's crime, there's gambling. This was a part of town where even when the town was still pretty racist, this is like where black people and white people would be in the same room and bumping shoulders with each other, like this street. So this has always been kind of a street that isn't thought of as that nice. So in the 60s or 70s or whenever this started, the artist who did all this, he wanted to kind of beautify this street and show that Philadelphia is a beautiful place. So he installed these types of art right here, but also all the way down the street you'll see lots of buildings that have this art. And that was kind of his, it's his art style and his passion, but also his kind of love of Philadelphia to do this type of thing. So if you look in here, it's all like this, wall to wall. And this was an empty lot that no one was using, and he turned it into this art. The owners eventually found out about it, and they wanted to tear it down and sell the property. So a nonprofit got created, and they bought it, and now it's a museum. But originally, this was someone which wasn't using this land, and he turned it into this whole thing. He was really inspired by Mexican art, and he's like, using concrete and mixing all these things together, trash and glass, and he would paint clay tiles. So it's very cool in there. Look, this is where we're at. We're on South Street between 9th and 8th Street, and this is some of the art installations, the Magic Gardens art by Isaiah Zager. So you can see it all around us. These people's homes have been decorated and beautified with his art. We're at the home of Octavius Cato. He was a really prominent leader in the black community in Philadelphia around the time of the Civil War. And just to lay down the groundwork, Pennsylvania it's thought of as like one of the more free states, kind of, but it's on the border of the South. And in fact, it wasn't that great here either. It was one of the first colonies. There was slavery here. The whole Quaker idea is that everyone's equal, even if you're the king or the commoner. But Quakers here, they had slaves, they sold slaves, just like anywhere else. So there was a lot of hypocrisy. So in the 1700s, some German Quakers came in and they were like, you guys aren't supposed to have slaves. Like, that's against our whole religion. So one church in the suburbs like wrote a little thing that said slavery is wrong and we shouldn't have it, but they still had slavery in Pennsylvania until like the 1780s, somewhere around that time. And for a brief period of time, black men could vote, but they took that away very quick. So so Philadelphia has had its own struggles with race. There was a youth, which was like kind of the famous school where black boys and girls would go and they would learn and they would read the classics and learn how to write and become great speakers. It was originally a school created for like people learn how to farm, but then the black people in Philadelphia said, we don't want to farm, we want to learn how to be lawyers and doctors and things like that. So they changed it and they made it a school just like all the white schools where you could learn to be whatever you want. So Octavius Cato, his dad was a prominent leader. Then he became a prominent leader in the community. His wife helped desegregate the streetcars in Philadelphia. He was also helped desegregate the baseball. He was a famous baseball player in the city in his time. Anyway, after the Civil War, Pennsylvania gave black men the right to vote again. This was a Democratic part of town, which kind of means like conservative white Irishmen was kind of around here. And they didn't want black people to vote, and they didn't want Republicans to take control. So on election day, I guess in 1871, they just started shooting black men around Philadelphia to scare them from voting. And Octavius Cato was one of the most famous black men in the city. So he and his friend knew they were in trouble. He went to a pawn shop and he bought a gun, but he didn't have any ammo. So he was walking back home to his home here to get ammo. And then a block away, like 2 or 3 men found him and they shot him and killed him. So he died just a few steps from here on his way home, and on election day. It's a really sad thing. But he was a very famous man here, and he did a lot of great things for the city. And if he had lived, he could have done even more. So it's a sad tragedy. Okay, so welcome to Washington Square Park. This is going to be the last stop on our tour of Philadelphia. I mentioned before that when Philadelphia was designed initially and planned, there were going to be 5 parks. It's like an X, right? So we went to Ridden House, which is the left bottom of the X. Now we're on the right bottom of the X. This is Washington Square Park. This was later called Washington Square Park. At the time it wasn't, it was named after George Washington, but at some point renamed. But of the parks, this is probably the one that has the most history. Because, like I said before, when Philadelphia was started, everyone stayed on the east side, just along the Delaware River. So no one was over in Rittenhouse Square. They were here. This is where everyone was meeting and doing things. This was at some times a popular location for the African American community in Philadelphia. It was also a place where it was kind of like a public grave. So there'd be people who couldn't afford kind of a nice cemetery plot. They would be buried here. And then what's most known about this park is that during the Revolutionary War, Washington's army, during a winter, stayed here in this park. And more than 1,000 men died of like injuries, sickness, and they were buried here. So we're walking around, and this is actually like a giant grave. So you can imagine 1,000 men and women are under your feet right now. So it's a very interesting place. There's a lot of history here. And it's kind of solemn, but it's also beautiful. And they've made it a park where everyone can walk their dog. You're not supposed to walk your dog here, but everyone does. And also a place where you can honor the history and the men and women who got buried here. So this is the conclusion of our tour. I hope you've learned about American history and Philadelphia history and seen how cool Philly is, and how you've also gotten to see that it has a lot of flaws in terms of racial politics and relations, but that's just part of its history. So it's important to know kind of where we came from and where we are now. There's still a long way to go, but I won't say a long way to go. Thanks for coming.